Picture this, if you will. The year is 1824, and the Rocky Mountains are not yet the playground of hikers and tourists that we know today. No, these peaks and valleys belong to something far more ancient and infinitely more dangerous. 10,000 grizzly bears. Think about that number for a moment. 10,000 massive predators, each one a walking nightmare of muscle, claws, and primal fury, roam from what we now call Yellowstone all the way down to the Colorado peaks. To put this in perspective, that's roughly the population of a small American city today. Except every single resident weighs between 400 and 1,000 pounds and can run 35 miles per hour. Each male grizzly claims territory spanning 50 square miles. 50 square miles? That's larger than San Francisco. Imagine trying to cross San Francisco, knowing that somewhere in those city limits lives a creature that considers you both an intruder and potentially dinner. Into this kingdom of claws and fury comes our protagonist, and what an unlikely hero he makes. Jedediah Coulter, just 22 years old, a farm boy from Virginia who probably never saw anything more dangerous than an ornery rooster back home. But here he is, seeking his fortune in the fur trade, armed with little more than courage, ignorance, and that peculiar American optimism that makes young men believe they can conquer wilderness that has been unconquered for millennia. Now, September mornings in the Rockies carry a particular kind of beauty and a particular kind of menace. The fog rolls through the valleys like ghostly fingers, muffling sound and turning familiar landscapes into alien worlds. On one such fog-shrouded morning, Coulter finds himself in what every mountain man fears most: a box canyon. One way in, no way out, and he's not alone. Standing between him and his only escape route is perhaps the most dangerous creature in North America, a 1,000-pound sow grizzly with twin cubs. Now, folks, if you've never seen a mother grizzly with cubs, let me paint you a picture. She's not just protective, she's a four-legged apocalypse waiting to happen. Every instinct, every fiber of her being, is programmed for one thing: eliminate any threat to her babies, and eliminate it with extreme prejudice. Coulter's hands are shaking, and who could blame him? He reaches for his single-shot pistol, knowing full well that its small lead ball might as well be a pebble thrown at a mountain. At best, it would wound her. At worst, and far more likely, it would turn a cautious predator into an enraged killing machine. But fate, as it often does in these stories, has other plans. As Coulter moves, his trembling hands accidentally shatter 2 precious glass vials in his possible sack. That's mountain man speak for his supply bag. One vial contains his winter's supply of beaver castoreum, worth $60. To put that in today's money, we're talking about $1,500 worth of trapping bait, gone in an instant. The second vial holds skunk essence, that reeking liquid he uses to mask his human scent while trapping. The mixture explodes across his buckskins in a nauseating cloud that would make a modern sewage worker gag. But here's where our story takes a turn that defies everything we think we know about predator and prey relationships. The bear charges. Picture this: 1,000 pounds of muscle and fury covering 30 yards in 2 heartbeats. That's faster than most cars accelerate. Death is bearing down on Coulter with the inevitability of an avalanche. Then, impossibly, she skids to a halt just 15 feet away. 15 feet. Close enough that Coulter can see the individual hairs on her massive snout, close enough to smell her breath, close enough to look into those small, dark eyes that hold intelligence far older than human civilization. For 13 seconds that feel like hours, predator and prey stand frozen in time. The bear's massive head weaves back and forth in confusion. You can almost see the gears turning in that primitive but effective brain. Every instinct screams, "Threat!" but her nose is telling her something else entirely. Something that doesn't compute. The bear snorts, a sound like a steam engine releasing pressure. She shakes her head violently, as if trying to clear away cobwebs of confusion. Then, in a moment that will echo through the fur trade for decades to come, she turns away. Not in retreat. Bears don't retreat, but in bewilderment. She herds her cubs up the canyon wall, leaving Coulter alone with his racing heart and an accidental discovery that will revolutionize how humans survive in grizzly country. But here's what makes this story truly fascinating. Coulter's discovery wasn't really a discovery at all. The roots of his salvation reach back through centuries of indigenous wisdom that white newcomers never bothered to learn or respect. The Shoshone people had long practiced similar protection rituals, mixing sage smoke with wolf scent during their vision quests in bear country. Young warriors would fast for days, purifying themselves, then apply these sacred mixtures before venturing into the most dangerous territories to seek spiritual guidance. The Crow warriors used rancid buffalo fat mixed with wild onion before hunting in the Absaroka ranges. Not to kill bears, mind you, but to avoid them entirely. Even the Spanish, those early European colonists, recorded these practices. In 1798, Spanish missionaries documented native peoples of the southern Rockies, painting themselves with herbs that made the great bears blind to their presence. The phrase, blind to their presence. What a perfect description of what Coulter experienced in that canyon. Yet these traditions remained carefully guarded secrets, shared only within tribes, and never with the wave of white newcomers who flooded the mountains, seeking what they called beaver gold. The indigenous peoples had learned, through bitter experience, that sharing such knowledge with outsiders often led to its abuse and destruction. At Fort Ashley, where 400 trappers were wintering, Coulter's story spread like wildfire. Picture that scene. Rough men gathered around flickering fires, each one calculating what such protection could mean for his survival and profits. These weren't scholars or scientists. They were practical men who measured success in beaver pelts and measured danger in scars. But they understood immediately that Coulter had stumbled onto something that could change everything. What none of them realized was that they were about to enter an age where the line between human and animal, between civilization and wilderness, would blur in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about survival in the American West. The question hanging in the smoky air of Fort Ashley that winter was simple. Could this accidental discovery be repeated? Could desperate men learn to become invisible to the most dangerous predators on the continent? The answer would transform the fur trade and cost more lives than anyone could imagine. By 1828, word of Coulter's miraculous escape had transformed from campfire legend into something far more systematic and dangerous. What began as a desperate accident had evolved into a sophisticated art, and like any art worth mastering, it demanded both genius and sacrifice. Enter Jim Beckwourth, one of the most remarkable figures in American frontier history. An African-American mountain man in an era when such a thing seemed impossible, Beckwourth possessed that rare combination of intellectual curiosity and absolute fearlessness that marks true pioneers. While other men were content to splash on whatever mixture might work, Beckwourth approached the scent technique like a medieval alchemist pursuing the philosopher's stone. His laboratory was the wilderness itself, and his test subjects were creatures that could kill him with a single swipe. Through 4 years of trial and error, and more close calls than any sane person should survive, Beckwourth perfected a 7-ingredient formula that became the gold standard of bear invisibility. Picture the ingredients. Beaver castoreum, that musky secretion worth more than silver. Skunk musk so potent it could clear a saloon. Wolf urine collected from pack territories at enormous personal risk. Pine pitch harvested from trees that had survived lightning strikes. Wild mint crushed at precisely the right phase of the moon, sage ash prepared through an ancient burning ritual, and finally, the secret component that set Beckwourth apart from all imitators. He claimed this final ingredient came from a Crow medicine woman, and for years, rival trappers tried everything to discover what it was. Some guessed bear gallbladder. Others thought it might be powdered rattlesnake skin or eagle feathers burned under specific stars. The truth, revealed only after Beckwourth's death, was far more prosaic, but no less effective. Fermented yarrow root, prepared through a process that took 3 months and required the patience of a saint. The grand rendezvous of 1829 was where legends were born and fortunes were made. Picture this gathering. 800 mountain men, native traders, and Mexican merchants converged where the Green and Wind rivers meet, creating a temporary city in the wilderness. It was part trade fair, part carnival, part diplomatic summit, and it was here that Beckwourth chose to demonstrate his mastery in a way that would be talked about for generations. A meadow stretched before the assembled crowd, and in that meadow, 3 grizzly bears fed on an elk carcass. These weren't small bears, mind you. We're talking about mature adults, each one capable of decapitating a horse with a single blow. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Beckworth, coated in his mysterious formula, walked calmly through the meadow as if he were strolling through a garden party. The bears lifted their massive heads, tested the wind with those incredibly sensitive noses that can detect a scent from 20 miles away, and then, impossibly, returned to feeding as if Beckworth were invisible, not just tolerated, not just ignored, but truly invisible to their senses. It was a demonstration that defied everything these hardened frontiersmen thought they knew about the natural world. The economic impact was immediate and staggering. Think about this. Trappers using the scent technique reported 300% increases in their beaver catches. 300%. They could now access territories that had been absolutely off-limits, places where grizzly concentrations made trapping suicidal. Suddenly, the most dangerous regions became the most profitable. Thomas Broken Hand Fitzpatrick. And yes, he really had lost fingers to a rifle explosion, hence the nickname, mapped 4,000 square miles of virgin trapping grounds in the Yellowstone country during the summer of 1831. 4,000 square miles. That's larger than the state of Connecticut. He moved through grizzly congregations around spawning streams like a ghost, invisible to predators that had never learned to fear humans because they'd never had reason to. The technique transformed from individual survival tool to brigade strategy. Joe Walker's legendary expedition of 1832 demonstrates this evolution perfectly. Walker moved 60 men and 200 horses through the bear-dense Humboldt River region using coordinated scent masking. Imagine the logistics. 60 individual scent applications, each one requiring precise timing and proportions, all coordinated so that an entire expedition could move as one invisible entity through some of the most dangerous territory in North America. Walker's journal captures the surreal nature of these early expeditions. The great bears would approach our night camps, some coming within 20 paces of our fires. Yet they showed no aggression, only confusion, circling downwind again and again as if trying to solve an impossible riddle. 20 paces. That's close enough to see the reflection of firelight in their eyes, close enough to hear their breathing, close enough to smell their wild musk. But here's the thing about any technique that seems too good to be true. It usually is, at least for those who don't respect its complexity. Not everyone mastered the art with equal skill, and the failures were often spectacular and deadly. Pierre Charbonneau, a French-Canadian voyageur with more courage than sense, nearly died when he mixed the formula incorrectly. Instead of creating the sensory white noise that confused bears, his botched mixture created something like a dinner bell. Bears began following his scent trail like bloodhounds, drawn by whatever chemical mistake he'd made in his preparation. Only the quick thinking of his Hidatsa wife saved his life. She recognized the signs immediately, bears approaching with purpose rather than confusion, and doused him in rancid fish oil, a smell so overpowering that it masked whatever attractive scent he'd accidentally created. The incident revealed a crucial truth that many men learned too late. This wasn't some simple folk remedy you could slap together from memory. The mixture required precise proportions and timing that would challenge a modern chemist. Too much wolf scent triggered territorial aggression in the bears. Too little skunk musk failed to mask the human odor that screamed threat to every predator instinct. Castoreum, harvested in the wrong season, lacked the chemical potency that made the formula work. Even the method of application mattered. Rubbed into the skin versus splashed on clothing could mean the difference between invisibility and a gruesome death. Knowledge became currency in the mountain. Economy, more valuable than beaver pelts or Spanish silver. Master mixers like Beckworth could charge enormous fees, sometimes $50 or more, to prepare batches for less experienced trappers. $50. In today's money, that's over $1,000 for a single application of what was essentially processed animal secretions and plant matter. But it worked. And in a world where a single mistake could leave your bones scattered across some nameless valley, where grizzly bears ruled territories larger than European kingdoms, That knowledge was worth every penny. The question was, could such artisanal expertise be scaled up to meet the growing demand of America's expanding fur trade? The answer to that question would come in 1835, and it would be written in blood. The catastrophe of 1835 began, as most catastrophes do, with the best of intentions and the worst of assumptions. William Sublette was no amateur. He was one of the most successful fur traders in the Rocky Mountains, a man who had turned wilderness navigation into an art form and beaver pelts into substantial wealth. But success, as history teaches us again and again, can breed the kind of confidence that leads to spectacular failure. Sublette's vision was ambitious in the way that only American enterprise could be ambitious. He wanted to outfit the largest fur brigade in history. Not dozens of men, but hundreds. Not a single season's worth of pelts, but enough beaver to flood the European markets and make him the undisputed king of the Rocky Mountain fur trade. It was a plan worthy of a robber baron, and like many such plans, it required scaling up processes that had never been designed for mass production. The scent formula had worked perfectly for individual trappers and small brigades, but how do you supply hundreds of men with a mixture that required weeks to prepare properly? How do you maintain quality control when master mixers like Beckworth could only produce limited quantities? Sublette's solution seemed brilliantly modern. He would industrialize the process. Enter Dr. Marcus Thornburg, a Philadelphia chemist who represented everything the Enlightenment promised about scientific progress. Thornburg possessed advanced degrees, access to the latest laboratory equipment, and complete confidence in the power of scientific analysis to solve any problem. When Sublette commissioned him to mass-produce the scent formula, Thornburg approached it like any other chemical challenge, using the primitive chemistry of the day. And remember, this was decades before we understood complex organic compounds. Thornburg analyzed samples of the traditional mixture. He identified the primary compounds, measured their ratios, and reverse-engineered what he believed was a perfect synthetic reproduction. His factory in Philadelphia began producing 500 packets of Thornburg's patented bear deterrent, each one selling for $10, a fortune for working trappers, but a bargain compared to the custom mixtures that cost 5 times as much. On paper, it was a triumph of American ingenuity. Mass production meeting frontier necessity, science improving upon folk wisdom, efficiency replacing the unreliable artisanal methods of individual trappers. Sublette invested $20,000 in the enterprise, EA, in today's money. That's over $500,000. The packets were shipped west with all the confidence that 19th-century industrial technology could muster. On May 15th, 50 men of the Sublette expedition entered the Wind River Range. Every single man carried his packet of manufactured scent, applied according to Thornburg's precise instructions. They were, in their minds, the most scientifically protected fur brigade in history. They were about to become something else entirely, a case study in how spectacularly wrong scientific confidence can be. The first warning came from Moses Black Harris, a veteran trapper whose instincts had been honed by decades of surviving in grizzly country. Harris noticed something that chilled him to the bone. Bears were showing unusual interest in their camps, approaching closer each night rather than maintaining the respectful distance that the traditional scent formula ensured. Harris used the old hand-mixed formula, prepared according to methods passed down from Beckworth himself. The bears ignored him completely, but they seemed increasingly agitated by the other men. He urged Sublette to abandon the expedition immediately, warning that something was fundamentally wrong with the manufactured scent. But Sublette, having invested his fortune and reputation, refused to consider retreat. On May 22nd, at dawn, the massacre began. Picture this scene. 50 men sleeping in their bedrolls, confident in their scientific protection, when a massive male grizzly, followed by 7 others, charged directly into the sleeping camp. Not the confused, hesitant approach that marked successful scent masking, but a purposeful, enraged assault that spoke of predators who had been provoked beyond endurance. The manufactured scent, lacking the biological complexity that only nature could provide, had created what modern scientists would call a super stimulus. Instead of confusing the bears' olfactory systems, It had triggered something far more dangerous: territorial rage. The simplified chemical signature was close enough to natural bear scent markers to be recognized, but different enough to be perceived as a challenge from rival bears. What followed was 3 days of systematic hunting that reads like something from humanity's darkest nightmares. The bears didn't just attack and retreat. They hunted. They tracked scattered survivors through ravines and forests with the methodical patience of creatures that had evolved to be perfect predators. Men who had survived Indian raids, avalanches, and Rocky Mountain winters found themselves prey to an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural in its efficiency. Young Kit Carson, who would later become one of the most famous frontiersmen in American history, watched his mentor Andrew Drips make the ultimate sacrifice. Drips recognized what was happening. The manufactured scent was marking them for death rather than protecting them. In an act of heroism that epitomizes the mountain man code, Drips washed off the failed scent with creek water and deliberately led 3 bears away from a group of wounded men, saving their lives at the cost of his own. Only 5 men escaped to tell the tale, including Carson, who never used manufactured scent again. For the rest of his legendary career, Carson relied exclusively on traditional methods and treated any attempt at mass-producing wilderness wisdom with the skepticism of a man who had seen science fail catastrophically when it mattered most. The disaster's impact rippled through the fur trade economy like a financial tsunami. Insurance rates for mountain expeditions tripled overnight, when companies would insure them at all. The London fur market, built on the assumption of steady beaver harvests from the American Rockies, crashed when news arrived that the summer harvest would be minimal. Investors who had poured money into Western expansion found themselves holding worthless paper. But the most significant impact was philosophical rather than economic. The tragedy forced a fundamental re-evaluation of the relationship between scientific innovation and indigenous knowledge. The hubris that had driven Thornburg's mass production gave way to a new respect for traditional methods and the wisdom they represented. At Fort Laramie, Crow Chief Heavy Shield met with the survivors in a gathering that would be remembered for generations. His words, recorded faithfully by Carson, carried a weight that went far beyond the immediate tragedy. The mountain spirits cannot be fooled by white man's medicine water. Only those who approach with proper ceremony, who fast and pray and mix with reverence, earn the right to walk invisible among the great bears. Heavy Shield wasn't speaking metaphorically. He was describing a fundamental truth about the relationship between humans and nature that industrial civilization was only beginning to understand. The scent formula wasn't just chemistry, it was ceremony. It wasn't just technology, it was tradition. And it couldn't be mass-produced any more than wisdom or courage could be manufactured in a Philadelphia factory. The blood moon that rose over South Pass on May 24, 1835, illuminated more than scattered equipment and abandoned camps. It revealed the limitations of a worldview that believed science could improve upon any natural process, no matter how ancient or complex. But it also revealed something else: the resilience of knowledge that had been tested not in laboratories, but in the crucible of survival itself. The traditional methods would survive, carried forward by those wise enough to understand that some secrets of the wilderness could never be captured in a glass vial or reduced to a chemical formula. The question was, who would carry that knowledge into an uncertain future? The true history of the bear scent technique stretches back 1,500 years, preserved not in dusty academic journals, but in the living memory of peoples who understood that survival depended on respecting forces far older and wiser than human civilization. Shoshone winter counts, those remarkable pictographic records painted on buffalo hides, show evidence of similar practices dating to the 6th century after Christ. Blackfoot oral traditions speak of medicine men who could walk among the great bears as brothers, using sacred mixtures that rendered them invisible to predators. Archaeological evidence supports these ancient claims. In cliff dwellings throughout the Southwest, researchers have found residue of complex organic compounds that match the chemical signatures of traditional bear scent formulas. Spanish records from 1768 describe Pueblo peoples using miraculous unguents that allowed them to gather pine nuts in territories where grizzlies congregated during harvest season. The indigenous peoples of North America had developed, through centuries of careful observation and experimentation, a technology that modern science is only beginning to understand. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. As the fur trade collapsed in the 1840s, victims of changing fashion and overharvesting, this ancient knowledge didn't die with it. Instead, it found new guardians, passed down through whispered conversations and careful instruction to those deemed worthy of carrying forward such dangerous wisdom. Mountain man Joseph Lafayette Meek retired to Oregon's Willamette Valley in 1847, carrying with him not just memories of adventure but the practical knowledge that had kept him alive through 2 decades in grizzly country. Meek understood that the technique was more than survival skill. It was cultural inheritance that connected him to both indigenous wisdom and the fraternity of mountain men who had mastered the invisible arts. He taught the technique to his mixed-blood children, emphasizing not just the chemical formulation, but the respect and ceremony that made it effective. His daughter Helen Meek Richardson became perhaps the first woman to document the formula in writing, hiding it in her 1873 diary between recipes for apple butter and notes about garden plantings. Her careful documentation preserved not just ingredients and proportions, but the philosophical understanding that made the technique work. The knowledge survived through whispered transmission across generations and cultures. In 1924, exactly 1 century after Jedediah Coulter's accidental discovery, Yellowstone Ranger Theodore Whitman used the ancient technique to rescue a lost child from a valley where a grizzly sow had been seen with cubs. Whitman had learned the formula from his grandfather, who had trapped with Jim Bridger in the legendary days of the Rocky Mountain fur trade. The rescue made national headlines, but Whitman carefully avoided explaining exactly how he had managed to search bear territory safely. The technique remained what it had always been. Knowledge shared only with those who understood its power and responsibility. In 1978, Alaskan guide Sarah Crowfeather made her own headlines when she led 12 wildlife photographers through Katmai National Park's dense bear population without a single incident. Crowfeather used her great-grandmother's formula, prepared according to traditions that had never been written down, only passed from elder to apprentice through hands-on instruction and spiritual preparation. The photographers, expecting modern bear spray and noisemakers, instead found themselves coated in substances that seemed to come from another century entirely. Yet they moved through concentrations of brown bears that would have been impossible to navigate with conventional protection. The photographs from that expedition became some of the most celebrated wildlife images of the 20th century, capturing intimate moments of bear family life that had never before been documented. Scientific analysis finally caught up with indigenous wisdom in 2018, when University of Montana researchers subjected the traditional formula to rigorous chemical and behavioral analysis. What they discovered validated everything that mountain men had known by instinct and experience. The combination of compounds created what they termed sensory white noise that overwhelmed bears' olfactory processing without triggering threat recognition. The study showed an 85% reduction in aggressive encounters compared to 65% for modern bear spray. More importantly, it revealed the sophisticated understanding of animal psychology that had been embedded in the traditional preparation methods. The formula didn't just mask human scent, it created a complex chemical signature that confused the cognitive processes bears used to categorize threats and prey. Today, the ancient knowledge lives on in unexpected places, adapted to modern contexts but retaining its essential character. Retired Navy SEAL Marcus Rodriguez teaches the technique at his Montana Wilderness School, having learned it from a Lakota elder during survival training. Rodriguez emphasizes what his teacher taught him. The formula works not because it's chemistry, but because it's ceremony that acknowledges the power and intelligence of the creatures humans share the wilderness with. Wildlife photographer Yuki Tanaka credits the traditional formula with allowing her to capture intimate grizzly family portraits in the Canadian Rockies, images that have revolutionized our understanding of bear social behavior. Tanaka spent 3 years learning the preparation methods from Cree elders, understanding that the technical knowledge was inseparable from the spiritual preparation that made it effective. Perhaps most remarkably, in 2019, 2 hikers lost in Glacier National Park survived 7 days in peak grizzly habitat using a makeshift version of the formula created from trail supplies. When conventional rescue methods failed due to weather, they remembered fragments of the traditional technique learned from an outdoor survival course. Using mint tea, pine sap scraped from trees, and the fermented residue of energy bars, they created a crude but effective version of the ancient protection. Their survival story sparked renewed interest in traditional wilderness skills, but also highlighted the fundamental truth that indigenous peoples had always understood. True, survival knowledge can't be separated from the wisdom and respect that give it meaning. As climate change pushes human-bear encounters to record levels, the mountain men's rediscovered secret gains new relevance. Grizzly bears are expanding their range, moving into areas where they haven't been seen for generations. Hiking and camping in bear country is becoming more dangerous, not less, as traditional patterns of animal behavior shift in response to changing ecosystems. Yet those who carry the knowledge today emphasize what Jedediah Coulter learned in that terrifying moment in 1824. True invisibility comes not from chemistry, but from humility, not from conquering nature, but from finding one's small place within its vast design. The scent formula works, but only for those who approach it with the reverence and understanding that indigenous peoples brought to all their interactions with the natural world. The technique survives today not as a consumer product or technological solution, but as what it has always been, a bridge between human vulnerability and natural power, a reminder that wisdom often comes disguised as accident, and that the most profound knowledge is often carried by those our society overlooks or dismisses. In our age of synthetic solutions and technological fixes, the story of the bear scent technique offers something both ancient and urgently modern. Proof that some of nature's secrets can only be unlocked by those humble enough to listen, patient enough to learn, and wise enough to understand that survival in the wilderness requires not dominance, but partnership with forces far greater than ourselves. The bears still rule the mountains. The question is whether we're wise enough to earn our place among them.